Hello to those on the call and welcome to the Regional Benefit Sharing webinar by Community Power Agency. We've had quite a few people register for the call, over 190. So I imagine folks will still be trickling in as we're getting going, but we've got a lot of content to get through, so we'll get started. I'll begin this webinar by acknowledging that wherever we are, we're meeting on the lands of First Nations people. And I extend my heartfelt thanks to the oldest living culture on earth for their ongoing custodianship of our country, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and to any First Nation people joining us on the call today. My name is Christy Walters. I'm one of the directors at Community Power Agency, and I'm joined here today by my fellow directors Kim Mallee and Dr. Jarra Hicks, and Eleanor Buckley helping us out with some tech support today. And we've got a few panelists that I'll introduce in a moment. So Community Power Agency, we set up with a mission to collaborate with and build capacity in communities, government and industry to create renewable energy policies and projects that result in a fairer and faster shift to our clean energy future. So it's so encouraging that we have such a wide spread of attendees joining us today, from councils, renewable energy developers, folks from transmission and retailing companies, from state government, philanthropists, civil society, and community folk as well. And I think it's quite a testament to the number and variety of folks here that this topic is quite timely and widely felt across the sector. So in today's webinar, we're going to be hearing from report authors Dr. Jarra Hicks and Kim Mallee to go over the context that's brought us to writing the regional benefit sharing discussion paper. And we'll also be joined to hear reflections and insights from our panelists to contribute their thoughts and experience on regional benefit sharing as well. We've got Lisa Lumsden from the Next Economy, Kate Hook from Realliance, and Luke Osborne from Stride Renewables. And I'll introduce them a bit further later on. And we've got about 30 minutes for Q&A with you all at the end of us. So please post your questions as we're going throughout the session today in the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can also upvote other people's questions so we know which ones are really pertinent for folks in the audience. And now, while this session is a webinar, here at Community Power Agency, we're big fans of collaboration. And so at the beginning of the Q&A section, we'll be inviting people that have posted questions to come on and join us as panelists so that they can verbally ask questions and it can be a bit more engaging for everybody. So yes, we'll do our best to get to all the questions and we'll see how we go. Alrighty, so I'd like to now hand over to Jarra to get us into the content and introduce our work a little bit further.
Great, thanks Christy, and hi everyone. So fantastic to have you in the room. If we get just one more person, we'll reach the 100 mark, so that's really exciting. So thank you for joining this important conversation on regional benefit sharing. We're talking about what it is, what it could be, why it's important in this time of the renewable energy rollout, and the relationships and the contributions that this is creating for communities that host renewable and transmission projects. So today we'll be sharing with you the key content from our recent discussion paper that we've released on regional benefit sharing. But yeah, we're also looking forward to having a bit of a discussion with all of you, hearing about your questions and your experiences and thoughts on this topic as well. This topic is emerging as both a key opportunity and a key challenge in the current context of renewable energy, and particularly in areas of renewable energy zones where there's plans for a very high concentration of projects and new transmission lines. So, but while regional benefit sharing has been identified as a key component of the future of renewable energy and transmission in our country, we're still not sure what that looks like. No jurisdiction as yet has really landed or clearly defined what this might look like. So it's a conversation that I think has a lot of different considerations. There's a lot of things to be aware of, a lot of options. And it's really in the spirit of having a deeper and a more informed conversation about this that we offer the discussion paper and present it to you today. So a little more about Community Power Agency. We've been around and working in the renewable energy space for 13 years now. We do a whole range of different activities with different stakeholders. And I think one of our really unique vantage points is that we work with communities on the ground who are doing their own renewable energy projects or who are involved in policymaking processes or involved in large-scale renewable energy projects. But we also work with governments, whether that's local, state, federal government, on policy development and evaluation. And we also work with industry in the practice of the way that they approach renewable energy development. And within this, we like to take a capacity building approach and innovation approach. But we also do advocacy and research, helping to translate between all of those parties. Next slide, please, Kim. Just a bit of background, our work in the space around the practice of community engagement and benefit sharing in relation to large-scale renewable energy development. We've been doing work in this space for quite some time. We've published a number of guides and resources that might be familiar to you, including the Victorian guidelines for benefit sharing and community engagement in renewable development. We have a couple of key publications that we worked on and are published through the Clean Energy Council, including the Guide to Benefit Sharing Options for Renewable Energy Projects. So it's drawing from this work and the research that stands behind these types of reports that we have been key authors of. It's that foundation of knowledge and experience that we now bring in to present this discussion paper. Also drawing on the work that we're doing right now in various renewable energy zones across the country, having conversations with different stakeholders in those places. So it's really important, I think, just to start with the why. Like, why do we share benefits? And I think there's a lot of different reasons, and there's different benefits for different stakeholders involved. I think fundamentally it is about making a positive contribution in the communities that are host to our projects, whether they're large-scale renewables projects or transmission projects. And that having this in mind, it's an opportunity to build good relationships with communities, to have a conversation about how this new development can contribute positively in a community. That's fundamentally a positive conversation to have, and one that can help to build trust and good relationships in a community. That increases the local community's willingness to accept changes in their much-loved environment. It's also a conversation that is fundamentally about fairness in the distribution of the impacts and the benefits of renewable energy. And it's about trying to broaden the scope of people who are experiencing a direct and a tangible benefit from the projects that are within their region, within their immediate, maybe even their immediate neighbourhood. Of course, this fundamentally does contribute in terms of projects and proponents and the whole industry. It helps us to build a social license to operate, which is fundamentally important, of course, and it's something that we're all, I think, as policymakers and as practitioners, trying to better understand. How do we proactively build social license? But benefit sharing is also good business sense. It has been shown in a very tangible way to ease the planning costs and to reduce timeline pressures for projects that can have very real monetary benefits, particularly in the long run. But benefit sharing is also about recognising that when we establish a new renewable energy project, we are taking the value of a common resource, a shared common resource, the sun, the wind, the water, and we are generating value from that. And the communities that host the projects deserve to benefit from that value creation. So that's the why. And then in terms of what's different about regional benefit sharing, we see regional benefit sharing as being the strategic aggregation of benefit sharing programs associated with individual energy projects that are located in a common geographic region. And this is really emerging as a conversation because we are already seeing some regions in the country where there's a high concentration of projects, and we are predicting and planning for many more regions that will have a high concentration of projects. And within those contexts, we need to think about how do our projects relate to each other in many senses, across workforce and across accommodation, across many different things, and benefit sharing is one of those things. So this applies for generation projects, but also for storage, transmission, and the benefit programs that state governments might implement as part of their renewable energy zones. But it's also fundamentally about viewing the opportunities and challenges of benefit sharing at a regional scale, but in perspective to the other scales that exist as well. And it's very important, and we'll talk more about this, that regional level benefit sharing does not compromise the direct and positive relationships that need to happen between a project, the project developer, and the immediate host community and its immediate neighbours. Thanks, Kim. We see a real opportunity for pursuing regional benefit sharing, and we see, the coordination of multiple benefit sharing projects as something that can help us solve a number of problems and realise a number of really exciting opportunities. Some of those opportunities that we see are the ability to create a really a positive and a tangible association with this idea of a renewable energy zone, the idea helping to create a positive identification with being a renewable energy zone or being a region that has a high concentration of renewables, so that at a broad population level, people are seeing this as a positive contribution to their region and their future vitality as a region. We also see opportunity for coordinated benefit sharing to create longer term initiatives that are able to have bigger and more meaningful impacts and really significant change on issues that local people identify as being really important to them. So we can move beyond a piecemeal approach to, that delivers small grants, to be thinking much more strategically about what's important here in this region, what are the real needs, how do we work together to leverage and pool our resources to get some really, really great step change outcomes. But there's also an opportunity to make things a bit easier and to clarify things for communities, to reduce the engagement fatigue that can happen if there's lots of projects all offering different benefit programs. Instead, let's coordinate, let's bring it together, let's streamline it, let's help to reduce that engagement fatigue and confusion. It also, has the opportunity to reduce duplication and crossover if multiple projects are doing really similar kinds of things within an area. And I think it also has the opportunity to streamline the administration and governance. And that has benefits from a community perspective, but also from a proponent perspective, just clarifying roles, maybe being able to reduce the overheads and the costs. So I think there's a lot of different reasons why this is a really important concept to consider, and to consider carefully about how it is that we might pursue what regional benefit sharing looks like. Going to hand now to my colleague, Kim Mallee, who's going to take us through some of the more nuts and bolts.
Thanks, Jarra. So when we talk about regional benefit sharing, I'd really like to be able to unpack the different layers of benefit sharing that can happen with a project, with multiple projects, and in a region. So one way of considering it is in different sort of like expanding concentric circles geographically from the site of a project. Now, some of you might have noticed in our report that we went to pains to try to emphasize the real importance of, if we're going to set up a regional benefit sharing program in an area and look to coordinate benefit sharing, that it mustn't usurp or replace the really important work that needs to happen from community benefit sharing at what we call project level. So project level for this discussion is the benefit sharing that occurs with the neighbours at a neighbourhood level. So that might be 2 to 5 kilometres from a project, and it might be programs like maybe neighbour payments or gifting of shares. And then also the closest geographic communities to a project. So the towns and villages, potentially 10, 20, 30 kilometres from a project, but also that distance might be larger in more remote regions. And the types of benefit sharing that might occur in those very closest regional communities and villages might be upgrades to the local village hall, or the fire shed or playground, or maybe a youth program in the closest school. Now, historically, this level of benefit sharing may have been the only level of benefit sharing that would occur when we have one project in a region. And what's exciting about regional benefit sharing, as we have multiple projects come to a region, is that we have the opportunity to really look at, well, what are some bigger, longer lasting initiatives that we could pull off if we get a bit thoughtful and strategic about it. And these might be initiatives like electric vehicle charging stations in the regional centre, or upgrades to larger assets like pools or libraries. So I think that, you know, when we start to look at these different levels, it really unpacks and breaks it into different parts of who needs to be involved in the conversation and how we balance all these different needs. Now, I want to take this point to make a special mention about contributions to local government. And we had a really specific part in the report to try and sort of unpick how do we bring the contributions to council into the context of benefit sharing. So in the same way, if I was building a house or a new shop or a factory in my council area, I'd be expected to contribute infrastructure contributions. We also believe that energy infrastructure projects should also contribute to the future infrastructure funds of councils. In Victoria, they have a really clear and established way of doing that, and they use a system called payment in lieu of rates. Now, it's very clear that this is separate from community benefit sharing budgets. And we just want to make that very, very clear that we do see local government as an absolute key stakeholder in the discussions around community benefit sharing with developers and with the different levels of community, but there should also be a very clear avenue for infrastructure contributions, such as payment of lieu of rates or other mechanisms, to really separate that out and make sure that the community, developers and councils aren't competing against each other for the same bucket of funds. So, chatting about the bucket of funds, if we look and imagine a project to have a quantum of funds that are available for benefit sharing, that would be the top square that we have in this diagram. And that amount should be its own line item in a project budget and completely separate from other budgets in the project costings. For example, sponsorship shouldn't be included in this total project benefit sharing budget. Historically, sponsorship has formed part of community benefit sharing programs, but we've seen in communities over the years the tension between a developer or a proponent needing to get brand recognition and the biggest audience, and what actually the community needs. And that crossover and tension point makes a lot more sense for sponsorship to sit in the marketing budgets, where the developer has full control over where those funds goes, and we keep community benefit sharing funding separate. The other really important distinction when we're calculating the budgets for benefit sharing is to understand that benefit sharing really is the portion of funds that are attributed to sharing the monetization of these common resources like sun, wind, and water. And they're not the cost of doing business that happens to create a benefit in the community. So there's a bit of a nuance in that. So for example, if a project is required to do vegetative plantings and screenings, that's a cost of doing business. It might have great biodiversity outcomes for the community. So yes, you could say it's a benefit, but it's not what we're calling the benefit sharing budget. Likewise, if the project is required to meet local procurement targets as part of the planning process or a state government incentive program, that's the cost of doing business in that jurisdiction. And it's not part of the funds that we calculate for benefit sharing. So when we look at how much should be calculated for this total pool of benefit sharing funds, we really recommend using a metric that's in terms of megawatts for each project. So that might be megawatt hours for storage, or megawatts peak capacity for wind and solar generation. And the thresholds that we are working from at the moment, and that we've actually outlined in the latest report that we're working with the Tasmanian state government on, is between at least, let's say, at least $800 to $1,800 per megawatt for onshore wind, and at least between $150 to $800 for solar. Now, there is a body of work that needs to happen right now around establishing meaningful thresholds and brackets for offshore wind, and that will need to happen in the context of how much it costs to create offshore wind in Australia and what the profit margins are. And it's really understanding that depending on a project's technology, scale, site location, that different projects will be more or less profitable. And it's in that profitability margin that we can negotiate the total budget for benefit sharing with the community. So understanding how that we split project level benefit sharing, as we just described, which is with the neighbourhood and the close geographic communities, versus how we have a portion for regional benefit sharing. And you can see that, you know, we've got a gradient here. Some communities will decide to have the vast proportion of those funds remain within the project level area of benefit sharing. And that might be because this is the first project in that region. There might be significant disadvantage in that area, and they may have never had the opportunity to have the renewal and the regional development that can come from this project. On the other side, we might have communities that, well, actually the project that they're in negotiations with is the fifth one in their area, and the hall's been painted 3 times. They have excellent equipment at the local fire shed, and they would actually like to start to see their funds really pooled into more regional initiatives that can have some great impact for their community. Now, the only way we get to understand where should this line sit is through really great engagement with those communities and being able to sit down with the local governments, the communities, their regional stakeholders, and the developers, and finding out what's a great fit. Now, really importantly, we have a range of state governments in Australia that are looking to try and enable some of these regional benefit sharing activities and initiatives to happen across their jurisdictions through programs like res access fees and alike. And we really want the state governments that are pursuing these types of initiatives to really consider how those schemes can dovetail in and support regional benefit sharing in a way that acts as a safety net, as opposed to taking agency and sort of autonomy from those local areas to make a decision in that space. So in the report, those of you who've had a chance to have a read through, you'll notice that Jarra and I have outlined 4 models. And this is really, you know, referring back to what Jarra was saying before, the reason we wrote the discussion paper was we wanted to extend and deepen the discussion and the thinking in this space, because our work across multiple reses in multiple states, we're hearing very similar conversations from very clever people trying to navigate this. And we wanted to be able to bring that knowledge together and help people stand and, you know, and work faster to some more exciting solutions. So the models that we've presented in the paper, we start with business as usual. We need a baseline. This is the do nothing scenario. And basically this is continuing as we have in the renewable energy industry to have project by project benefit sharing programs without coordinating them. The next model is, I suppose, like a light version of regional benefit sharing, where it really looks to coordinate the project level benefit sharing programs that stand alone in their own right. Now, this could be done by existing regional organisations, if there's a quite developed, say, progress association for the region, or a well-established foundation. And or it could be established a new entity, which would act as a service provider for developers. And the types of activities that they might do is looking to pull together and help coordinate some of the engagement activities, the governance processes around community reference groups, and also looking at providing services for coordinating multiple grant rounds. So you might have X developer stream of funding that's coming through, Y developer stream of funding that's coming through, and Z developer stream of funds that's coming through. Still all branded with those developers' names and has autonomy over that with their connections to those host communities. But the foundation or the regional entity that's being able to host it has like one web portal, has staged the applications processes, has maybe some combined governance structures for assessing, administering those grants, and the community has a central place to be able to navigate those benefit sharing programs in their community and not have to sort of try and keep across multiple funding streams, because we do know in regional communities and even in urban communities, there really is only so many people that, put their hand up to volunteer to write the grants and then deliver the grants and then acquit the grants that come from funding streams. So we want to be able to, value their volunteer time and make sure that they're getting the best access and the best opportunities. The third the third option is combining both project level and coordinating that with regional benefit sharing. So we take basically all those things I've just described in option 2 around coordinating the governance, but then we also have an avenue for initiatives to occur at a regional scale. So pulling, a slice of maybe 20% from this project, maybe 50% from another project into a pool that's regionally governed and able to do some of these larger initiatives. And what's really exciting about pooling some of those funds into a central location is that they can then be used to perhaps be the matching funds of larger state and federal government grants that a region might want to occur, and also enables multiple stakeholders to come together and really sort of address some persistent problems that might be occurring in that region that would otherwise not get to be able to occur. Now, for options 2 and 3, they do depend on a certain level of appetite from the community to get involved and govern these. Now, some communities will be further along their community development journey and have both the skills and interest and motivation and capacity to be able to run this. The fourth option is looking at perhaps communities that through great engagement put up their hand and say, look, we don't have time or capacity to run a regional benefit sharing program, and we would actually prefer that a government department such as the state government or a local government takes control of all of the benefit sharing funds, neighbourhood, close geographic community and regional, plus anything that might come from a state government initiative for a res activity. And we would like you to run that all and just give us the opportunities and the benefits as they arise through grants or scholarships or partnerships that might occur. Now, that is something that really needs to be considered carefully, because not all communities will feel as though that they want the government to step in and do that. So there are risks involved. And really for all 3 options, 2, 3, and 4, we really want to emphasize that deciding on which of these models and how they could fit together has to happen with fantastic engagement. And so I think that when we look at the steps that we might need to go through, which Jarra is about to elaborate on, creating an amazing regional benefit sharing program, we really need to come up with something that works for all sides. We need to make sure that we include the neighbourhood community and the close geographic communities, as well as the wider regional community that might be experiencing the whole res or a whole transition of industries. We absolutely need to have local government at the table, and we have to have developers there too. Everybody has a slightly different set of needs in this equation. So, for example, a regional benefit sharing program that we set up that divorces the developer's connection with the neighbourhood, doesn't have local government at the table, or maybe leaves state government's efforts in a silo all of their own, is going to be really fraught with being able to innovate these connections that might be able to pinpoint really persistent issues in a region and create long-lasting benefits. That means that not only do the people surrounding a project go, actually, I've got some really great things out of this, and that's meant some wonderful things for my family and my local economy, but actually means that the whole region identifies itself as a renewable energy zone or as a transition region, and has some quite positive social license and acceptance towards that. So I think what I'll do next is I'm going to hand over to Jarra, who's going to walk us through the last couple of slides from our content on establishing a regional benefit sharing model.
Thanks, Kim. So obviously, we're still very much in the ideas phase of this concept across all of Australia and across the whole renewables sector. So, but our experience working with communities and developers and state governments is we see a really important role for co-design in this space. So for us to really land what a great and appropriate regional benefit sharing model is going to look like in any particular place, we need to have a conversation that involves multiple stakeholders in what we call a co-design process. We believe it's, absolutely fundamental that local communities are supported and empowered as active agents in this process, because ultimately benefit sharing is about delivering a substantive and meaningful benefit for local communities. And who best to determine what that is than those communities themselves. So the co-design model is really about working in partnership with multiple stakeholders to create mutually beneficial outcomes. So, this would be conversations that involve community members, key local organisations, local government, state government, the project proponent, all, being able to provide input into different parts of the process through an organised program of work that might take several months to work through and involve lots of different kinds of engagement methods, from surveys and workshops and focus groups. And, really, I think we've got so many tools in our toolbox now for how to do great participatory engagement and design. And really benefit sharing is the perfect opportunity to do that. It is an element in renewable energy projects that can really boost the level of local participation and understanding, and even empower communities to some extent to make decisions about what's important and how something is done. So it does require active collaboration and a willingness to be transparent about certain aspects, of a project, not everything, but I think fundamentally we can choose to broaden the conversation and involve more people in this, and the benefit for all of us is the opportunity for our engagement to be received as being very genuine, and the opportunity to form some really trusted and lasting relationships through involving people in this design process. And just acknowledging that what's going to work in Northwest Tasmania in terms of a regional benefit sharing model is going to be really different from what's going to work, in the New England area of New South Wales. And you can't really understand the nuances of that unless you're on the ground having conversations. Next slide, please, Kim. So in terms of just some key recommendations to round out our content, fundamentally, regional benefit sharing is about doing a level of coordination to deliver some benefits in terms of streamlining the administration or the governance and or the impact of benefit sharing across a region. It's absolutely fundamental that it delivers strategic and long-lasting impacts on things that are local priorities. It's absolutely essential that it's coupled with strong engagement. And that means being co-designed and co-governed. So that engagement isn't just in the design phase, it's also ongoing in the ability to involve local people in ongoing decision making in terms of governance, but also the potential in 5 years' time to reevaluate where are we at, what needs to change, make sure you're staying relevant through involving local people in that evaluation process. And we also feel fundamentally it should not displace project level benefit sharing, because that is a really important relationship that we need to retain between a project proponent and the most immediate neighbours and most immediate community around a project. Within this space, we think there is a real role for government, both state and federal government, to help facilitate and resource the process to figure out what great regional benefit sharing looks like. It's really important to take what I would call an action learning approach. Whatever we do is the first time it's going to be done. We need to be open-minded and very reflexive and be learning from whatever it is that we go forward with. So I hope you all enjoy reading the report. There's obviously a lot more detail on all of this content in there, and we hope to have an ongoing conversation and get feedback over time. But for now, it's time to hear from our panelists. So I'll hand to you, Christy.
Excellent. Thanks so much to Jarra and Kim for such a detailed overview. I'm sure there's a lot more that you could have said. The report is several pages longer than the slides that you've just presented, so I really encourage people to dig into that, and as Jarra mentioned, reach out if you have further questions. We'll move on to our panelists now to hear their insights and reflections. But just before we do that, I wanted to draw people's attention to the Q&A. So please put in your questions, and also when you're reading others' questions, you'll see a little thumbs up in the sort of left-hand corner of each question. So you can click on that to upvote that question to let us know that you're also keen to hear the answer to that question. So that'll help us know which questions to focus on. And please write down your thoughts in there, even if it's not quite a question. Alrighty, we're going to hear from Lisa Lumsden first. She's the Senior Project Officer at the Next Economy, which is a not-for-profit organisation supporting regional communities around Australia to manage economic change and energy transition in a way that delivers social, economic and environmental benefits. In recent years, she's worked on projects in Gladstone and Latrobe Valley, and she also works with the University of Technology in Sydney on a transnational decarbonising electricity project, and has been investigating the social economic impacts of large-scale renewable energy development in the Upper Spencer Gulf in South Australia. And prior to all this, Lisa was a leader in the Repower Port Augusta campaign and a Port Augusta City Councillor during the surprise closure of the coal power stations there and the subsequent rise of the renewable energy industry. So just lots of relevant insights to share, and I'll pass over to you now, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Christy. Hello, everybody. I'm mostly going to be speaking today from my personal experience and the University of Technology Sydney research. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Port Augusta and where that is, it's a small town, 13,500 people, 20% of those are Aboriginal, is located at the top of the Spencer Gulf, with the Flinders Ranges down to the east, and it's semi-arid land with the desert out to the north. And from an industry perspective, after colonisation, it was a port initially, of course, Port Augusta, but then it had the railways, both state and Commonwealth railways that cross east to west through our nation, and then later, after the Second World War, became a coal power station town, and today is a renewable energy hub. So it's had quite a journey. And it is a community that has been assessed by the ABS as being in the lowest socioeconomic category that they have. So it's a community that does it pretty tough. And when the power station closed in 2016, 200 people lost their job, but it did spark the rise of the renewable energy transition. So it created the market for the energy, it created capacity in the grid. We had a state government at the time that was very proactive around developing renewable energy. And at the time, the community was really calling on solar thermal in particular but more broadly was indicating that they were very receptive to renewable energy development, and those projects really flooded in. In 2017, we had over $6 billion worth of projects being proposed just for the immediate region around Port Augusta, and that spanned from solar PV, wind, solar thermal, hydro, pumped hydro, and batteries were all in that mix. People were quite excited. Part of that period, there was a considerable amount of government and industry announcements and promises, and lots of hopes were built up in the community. And they related to not just community benefits, but as being described today, but procurement, education, training, employment opportunities, both during construction and during operation. Council had hopes for increased revenue, and the community hoped that there would be some image change to their region from being a dirty, cold town to being a kind of cutting edge, clean city. People had also had a long familiarity with industry, and the way that heavy industry, other heavy industries, including mining, which is still a major influence in the town, how they operated and how they contributed, and that their staff participated in their community, and that there were grants and scholarships and traineeships, and there was a whole kind of cohort of contribution that would stabilise in many ways the community. So they hoped that the renewable energy industry would be contributing to that stabilisation, especially post the power station closure. So as time went on, the development applications happened, and in those applications there were sometimes references to community benefit sharing, but usually there was no sort of definitions around how that would be administered, how much that would be, and what that would look like. And then we moved into the construction phase, and people learnt pretty quickly, actually, that the benefits that they had hoped for around accessing employment and training were actually quite limited and short-term and hard to access, and largely to do with just the nature and the skills requirements involved in construction. It also caused some other issues during the process around dust, and there were costs to council in terms of managing that, getting legal advice, working with the EPA to manage some of those, a lot of staff time, and there was infrastructure damage that was done during that construction period that they had to grapple with. There was also implications to the local community around, so the main highway that is the access point to the south of Port Augusta, for many months, like maybe 8 or 9 months, had large sections that were only 60 or 40 kilometres an hour. So everybody had to slow down, and then we had all the wind blades coming through. So there was a lot of impact on the community through that construction period, and not everyone was particularly excited about the visual impact that was going to have either. So then we've now moved into the operational phase. So all in the end, about four projects, large projects, got up. They amount to just over a 1 gigawatt of energy generation, and they're solar and wind, all of them. So none of the other types ended up getting up. But as you drive through the entrance up into the entrance of Port Augusta now, on both sides of the highway, you're basically driving through an avenue of massive wind turbines. So there's been a massive visual change. And there's about 50 to 60 people across the town that are now working in the generation, but the council continues to receive no additional income, and that is because of legacy issues related to an exemption that haven't been rectified by the state government. So in terms of actual benefits, ongoing benefits beyond those traditional forms of benefits, the only kind of community grant benefits is that each of these developers have each got various forms of contribution, and they range from about $20,000 to $50,000 a year. They're ad hoc grant programs. They're not coordinated. It's not quite clear how the decision making is made. It often tends to be, has been tended to be connected to who you know, and where the staff that work at the power stations, who they know and what clubs they're associated with. So it hasn't been coordinated as well as it could. And in a way, it's become a bit of a transactional arrangement, because there isn't a relationship that's been established. So essentially, it's felt a bit like a bit of a letdown, that process, and I guess that's not really very helpful for social license for renewable energy and in other regions and communities. And it saddens me that a better community benefit scenario wasn't established early on, especially given the socioeconomic needs in the community and the potential that there is. But in many ways, I see Port Augusta was at the forefront of this renewable energy zone type development. The community didn't really know how to handle it. The council didn't know, and many of these multinational companies that are now there, they were also very new. That some of these projects were the first projects in Australia, so they were also finding their way. But as time has gone on, communities have learned more about how to manage these conversations, the processes and the relationships to guide that makes for a wonderful contribution in a collective way. And so I really think that this report will contribute to that knowledge. And I still hold hope that these companies are going to be there for 30 plus years now, and that there is still scope for conversations, for there to be much more collective planning, for much greater significant legacy impact in the community. So thanks, guys, for this report, and watch this space.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lee. So it's always really useful to hear a first-hand experience of something similar to what we're talking about. So thanks for your reflections on that. Next, we're going to hear from Kate Hook, who's based in Orange and Central West New South Wales. She is the Community Engagement Manager for Renewable Energy Alliance, or also known as RE-Alliance, working mainly in the Central West Arana Renewable Energy Zone, and more recently in the Southwest Res around the town of Hay. Her work centres around understanding community experiences of renewable energy development, finding models that encourage their participation in local decisions, and making connections between communities and other players to support them on that journey. So I'll hand over to you now, Kate.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thanks again for a great report. And Lisa, I'm going to have a good chat with you about a lot of the things that you brought up. It's very interesting. Thank you. Just very quickly, because I'm sure most of you know who Renewable Energy Alliance is, but we are independent. We exist to support the clean energy transition in a way that provides prosperity for regional communities. And the way we do that, the 4 items on the bottom, spending a lot of time in communities to understand their experiences, and that's what I'm hoping to share today. Also collaborating with industry, roundtables, etc., for better practice, a lot of work on policy, and time spent in communities, which has been my work recently in Southwest Res, just building capacity and knowledge for both councils and communities. Thanks, Kim. So just quickly, if you haven't already seen EnergyCo's interactive map, that's what you can just Google to bring up the map that you see in front of you. That just shows you the reses in New South Wales, the 5 that have been declared, and the ones I'm going to just compare and contrast a little bit today is Central West Arana Res and Southwest Res. Very different because, sorry, Kim, the central, as you'll see in a second, the Central West Arana Res has currently got 37 projects on that EnergyCo map that you see there when you zoom into to that res zone. The Southwest Res it hasn't actually got any projects appearing there yet. They're just not at that stage on their development journey, but there are 7 main developers pretty active down there, and one with an office in the main street, etc. Thanks, Kim. So just a little sort of zoom in on the Central West. So you can see there are numerous projects, and some of them are quite clustered around certain communities, which is which presents a lot of challenges, as has been highlighted in the report. But this area, like the reason I'm contrasting these two, I think from what I hear from community, the experience of community in this area is more closely aligned to what Kim described as Model 1, business as usual. It's individual approaches by individual projects to the community members. A lot of the things that we've all heard about, consultation fatigue, etc., being experienced there. Whereas the other one, which I'll get to in a minute, it's Southwest Res. It's a lot earlier in its stage. As I said, there's only 7 projects to be talked about, but it's the difference is the way the community, particularly Hay Shire Council, is wanting to approach their engagement there is a big difference. And I think it's much more closely aligned to what Kim described as Model 2. And probably with a view to move to Model 3. There's aspects of Central West. And so I don't want to give the impression that there's been no coordination. And in fact, most recently, there's been a lot more work on coordinating things, which might actually take it closer to Model 4, if you can remember those 4 models that Kim went through. Thanks, Kim. I won't read through all of these. I just put some quotes down to give you an idea of what people have been experiencing in the res. It feels like it's happening to us, not with us. So a lot of people feel the community is being held at arm's length. There wasn't awareness there right from the beginning. The problem where there's a vacuum of information means disinformation can take over. There's a feeling the community wasn't involved really early on. So that meant that crucial community context was missed. And the example this person gave was with bushfires. People were still traumatized by that. And she was just pointing out that's a different kind of support and engagement is needed, depending on whether the community has experienced disasters or is in decline or is in growth. It's quite different. So there's a feeling that there was no sort of coordination that enabled there to be a real understanding of those differences. And so the other point was that there was a need for different res activities not to overlap. And her example was that there was a particular week where there was an EIS for this and one for that, and an information session, and all the people who were really engaged in that community felt like they couldn't possibly be across it all. So they just felt like that level of coordination was missing there. What you hear all the time is that the things that are really important, so the top priorities for regional communities, they're often bigger deliverables than one project's benefit fund alone can deliver. So I guess that's why I'm excited to be talking about regional. Some councils, the communities have more confidence in them and their abilities to manage this well. But what is seen sometimes is that often there are non-elected or sort of unofficial community leaders who are trusted more. And so it's really helpful when those people get involved. And just a point about as I was saying, that there's been some more activity around coordination. So the 3 main councils in Central West have now formed a steering committee with Energy Co. So it's this all of government approach. I think if you skip to the next slide, Kim, there might just be a quick graphic on that one. And sorry, that's very blurry. So they're calling this an all of government approach because, as you see in the middle, the 6 members are government organisations. There are working groups, as you see below that blue rectangle, that will be feeding in, and utilising people who can zone in on those issues and feed up the information. The question that the community still have on this is, at what stage does the community get to put input into this? Thanks, Kim. So moving on to the other one, so just by contrast, so Southwest Res, the map came off the Energy Co interactive site, but as I said, on that map as it stands today, no projects are showing there. So we have just realized has plotted these onto this map to give an idea where projects are. So as you can see, compared to the Central West diagram you saw earlier, there are far fewer projects. Hay is the council that is really trying to get on the front foot about this and has engaged Renewable Energy Alliance in doing a lot of work with them. And I think, as I say, what they're aiming to do is to overcome a lot of the fatigue issues and the lack of coordination issues and the efficiencies really that have been experienced and they've observed from afar in other res areas, by really getting on the front foot and inviting proponents to come and support them. Thanks, Kim. Next one. So just quickly, this is how they are doing that. So this is a body of work that we're doing in Renewable Energy Alliance. So it's that knowledge building so the community really knows what's going on, and the council as well. The middle stage is a set of guidelines or a framework. I think the latest they've come up with is fundamental principles for successful renewable energy development, which is really just a statement by the community and the council, who are hand in hand wanting to do this, to anyone about how they expect stakeholders to interact with them. And then the last piece we're doing is an industry roundtable with those 7 developers who have all been informed about this framework and are really keen on the idea because they see it's going to make life easier for them. And I will wrap up in a minute, but if you just go to the next slide, Kim, the important part for this is that all that work that we're doing now is leading to another body of work which will be done by another organisation. Not sure if I'm allowed to say who that is yet, but one we all love. So that is like a 10-year, evolving 10-year economic plan. And so that has got people really excited about that. Next one, thanks, Kim. So yeah, I'll just finish on this one. So really what the aims are here is it is a council or community-led strategy. So I guess in terms of regional, they're defining the region here as that region around where those projects are, which is largely around hay, but with a view to it becoming bigger over time once they get on the front foot and can lead. So the external message is, yeah, we've got this, we have expectations, we have a vision, that 10-year plan, and we invite projects to support it, rather than having every single project going to council, going to charities, going to community members, etc., and creating this sense of overwhelm. We've done this work up front and we invite you guys to come to this. And it's really been really great to see that the developers they've spoken to love that idea. Because, as I say here, this approach makes life easier for all parties. So just bringing it back to the wonderful report from CPA, that approach I can see is reducing that engagement fatigue. It accommodates changing community expectations, and certainly provides for legacy funds. You know, there's in that vision there'll be a range of things to fund, and a lot of it will need leverage. I might just leave that there because I'm sure I've gone past my time. Thanks, Christy.
Excellent, thanks, Kate. I can tell there's lots of things that everyone wants to share. Thanks so much for sharing your perspectives, and very useful to understand what some jurisdictions are doing to kind of get on the front foot with this idea of regional benefit sharing. Next up, we're going to hear from Luke Osborne, who's from Stride Renewables. Luke has 20 years experience in the renewable energy industry with an MBA, and is a fellow of Engineers Australia. He's got a technical background overlaid with decades of commercial and management experience, which is due to his involvement in the founding team and as the Chief Operating Officer for 2 market-leading companies, WinLab Systems and Reposit Power. He's also advised the New South Wales Government on the Emerging Energy Program and social licence strategies, and he's been a long-standing board member of Realliance. So it's lots of connections. Over to you, Luke, to hear some of your reflections as someone in the industry.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I'd first like to just say this is a very timely report, and I found myself nodding vigorously at a lot of the things that were said, and I'm just going to reflect a little bit on that. Yeah, try and give you an industry perspective. So the thing I'd like to say is that we really need the renewable energy zones in New South Wales. We've talked a bit about New South Wales. I know this goes outside, but I'll give you a New South Wales perspective. We're really committed now. There's no plan B. Our power stations, the traditional power stations, are stuffed. You know, they're old. Now they're losing a lot of money because they're pumping energy into negative pricing day after day after day. and they are going to come out of the market one way or another. All as consumers, we're going to pay to keep them on, as we will for Eraring, because Eraring, we are not going to be ready for that. So we are going to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to keep an old end-of-life asset alive. So we need these reserves to come online as quickly as possible. And the other thing that's sort of fresh in my mind is that we really need competitive energy prices in Australia. So all this needs to come online, but it also needs to be competitive. And that doesn't mean we can't get great outcomes for communities. We can. There's enough money there, but Australia sits as an energy leader. You know, we are one of the countries that powers the world, and we really need to do this with the renewables. That's just sort of grounding the importance of what we're trying to do. I have spent a lot of my career talking about social license because it's necessary, and we cannot build these projects without the ongoing support of the communities in which they exist. We have worked out methods in the renewable energy sector to achieve social license on a project level, and the Community Power Agency and Realliance have been really wonderful at sort of spreading that out through the community and through the development community. And most developers, or many developers now, are very good at this, particularly in wind. But when, you know, I challenged myself before coming on here to think about how do you take those same methods and elevate them to a regional level, it's really hard. And I enjoyed Kate's presentation there, and I think in a context like Southwest Res, that sounds like a really great approach. What we do at a project level, of course, is just, I talk about it in just 3 steps, trying to keep it really simple. One is to aggregate an amount of money, and on a project level, you try and make sure that's affordable, of course, and defensible and open. That's step 1. Step 2 is you decide who's eligible for receiving some of that money. Step 3 is you co-design, or you work with the community to decide on the projects that really work, or the methods that work, and often you end up with things that you never thought of when you started. And the reason that's important, that last step, is it builds trust, and that allows you to deal with the impacts, the very real impacts that we heard about with Lisa. And that, by the way, hurts a little bit to hear that story, because that's not what we wanted as an industry. So how do you do those 3 steps at a regional level? It's pretty difficult, but I would recommend, you know, as I think is talked about here, doing it the same way as we step back up to a regional level. Well, we have now money that's aggregated from many projects. We now have a bigger group of sort of eligible people and councils. But we still need to go through that same process of building bonds and building trust. I also am very encouraged by the fact that we appear to be learning from our mistakes at this regional level, and we've heard about an early example that didn't go well. We're looking at Central West, which is not going great, and I will say that it's a very, very hard thing that's being done. It happened during COVID. It's tough, so that's not a criticism of anyone, and it sounded like, you know, Hicks with Hay Council sort of got the bull by the horns a bit with the Southwest, and that's going better. So I really like that transition and progress, and that's great to see. But I'm struggling a little, and I think the Power Agency and Realliance understand this, but some others don't in government, to try and get across that it's not just a process of giving people money or giving benefits that gives you social license. The 2 things are quite different. And to explain that, I'm going to just test an idea or an analogy with you. Again, I want to use the analogy of a bucket, which we often use, but this time it's a bucket with trust in it. And that bucket is leaky. If you don't pay attention to it, all the trust leaks away, and there are people trying to punch holes in it and make it leak more, people who don't want these projects in their communities, and they tend to be activists on the other side. And I don't recommend we ever sort of give up on trying to convince people that this is a good idea, but we must also recognise that there are people doing that. If you turn up with unwanted gifts or a patronising approach into communities, that does nothing to fill your trust bucket, right? It's just unwanted stuff. People will dismiss it. So what does fill it is genuine consultation, genuine relationships with people, and being there on the ground, continually shoveling more trust in. As soon as you leave it and leave a gap, it'll all leak away. So you've got to be there, out there, continuously filling that bucket. So it's an idea of I'm trying to get away from the idea that money solves all things. It doesn't. And money is just a tool. The other thing that is involved with your trust bucket is impact mitigation. So we heard about, the road being chockers and the speed limit reduced to 60. I can imagine that really annoyed the people of Port Augusta. By having trust, you have a means for dealing with that kind of stuff, rather than just accepting complaints. Finally, I also wanted, while I've got the soapbox, I just wanted to really underline what we heard there about this sort of Orwellian doublespeak that's going on around social license. We, I think I'm not putting it as politely as Jarra did, but we need to just be clear about what we're talking about here and not use the term social license to mean a lot of things that aren't related. And the one that I'll really pull out is rates. So they are a tax. That's okay, but let's call them what they are. They're not a voluntary planning agreement. They're not social license. They're just rates. And the government and the councils need to get together and decide if they want to charge rates, but they should be competitive, make sure that they're not too expensive and that they're not dressed up to be something that they're not. Finally, I just wanted to reflect, since I've been asked to represent industry perhaps here, how industry will respond. And I'm not presently involved in industry other than as a consultant to industry. So I don't have I'm not pushing anything here. Projects will find it somewhat difficult, I think, in the context like the Central West, because they're competing with one another, and that's by design. So they're competing with each other for the finite power line or capacity of that power line. That's the centre of that res. Same with New England. It's going to be tough to get them all in the same room, I think, as competitors. So what needs to happen fairly quickly, I think, is a down select. So the government's sitting there and not releasing the access rights for Central West, which is the process of deciding who's going to get access to that power line. That's not really a great outcome. I think the government would acknowledge that. What that's doing is leaving a lot more projects in the community than can ever be built. That thing way oversubscribed. That's causing more consultation, more angst, more difficulty in the community that needs to be there. So I think one role for government is to be timely in its decision making and remove uncertainty continuously, and reduce the number of projects that are being proposed in each community as quickly as they can. So I'll just finish there. I think all of this comes back to being fair. Often that's mediated with money, and having a genuine relationship, empowering people to make some decisions about their own community, about what opportunities they want to pursue, and also obviously being as active as you can in mitigating some of those impacts. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. And thanks to all the panelists. We're going to do something a little bit differently now, where my colleagues are busily inviting people that have asked relevant questions to join us as co-panelists, so you can ask the questions directly. So while they're doing that, we've been also grouping some of our questions together. We can see that there's quite a few questions around the division of funds, questions on governance, and a few others. So we'll do our best to get through as many of those as possible. However, seeing as Boyd, you're the first one to join us, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Oh, hi everyone, and well done. Really cool to see this work come to life. So I'm quite interested around traditional owners and how the so there is some mention in the document around traditional owners, but there's a lot of work going on in Victoria in particular around particular benefit sharing arrangements, around self-determination outcomes, around having specific negotiations in that space. I'm interested in how that was reflected in your thinking and in the process of bringing this document together, and what that space, how that connects to this body of work.
I'm happy to jump in as a start and would welcome, other panelists to respond to. Thanks for the question, Brodie. Within the context of our paper, we encourage that First Nations people and organisations within the communities that regional benefit sharing is being considered, that they are an active part of that conversation of determining, what's appropriate for that region, that they have voices at the table in the mix alongside other community members, so that the needs and aspirations of that particular cohort in the community can be taken on board and involved in what regional benefit sharing looks like and what it delivers. But I think more broadly at the moment, we're hearing really clearly from First Nations leaders, like the First Nations Clean Energy Network and Original Power, that all renewable energy developments are happening on First Nations land, regardless of the legal tenure of that land. It is First Nations land. Therefore, there needs to be a direct conversation with First Nations people in, wherever a project is happening. That is a conversation around access rights and recognition of First Nations continuing connection to land. So I think there's two separate things that need to happen. There's a conversation around benefit sharing, and First Nations people are part of the broader community and part of that conversation, but there also needs to be a specific conversation had between a project and First Nations groups that is about how those two bodies themselves relate to each other and offer recognition and benefit just between those two parties themselves.
Well, thanks, Jarra. The next question we'll go to is from Claire. If you'd like to ask your question, which is around governance.
Yeah. So I just wondered where you saw the role of Energy Co, particularly in the New South Wales reses, and if you'd spoken to them at all about all of this.
Kim, over to you.
Thanks, Christy. Thanks, Claire, for your question. Yes, we've actually been working in the New England res for the last 2 years. We have an on-ground engagement coordinator there, Heidi McKellar, who's been there since January this year. And so we've been going to a lot of lengths to work with Energy Co in that res, and also working shoulder to shoulder with RE Alliance, who has quite strong connections with Energy Co within the CWO res, which is significantly further along than the New England res. So RE Alliance and CPA co-authored a briefing paper earlier this year. Kate, back in May, June, yep. And we tabled that with a range of the project directors in CWO res, so that they could start to see and hear some of the things that are being spoken about across other reses and other transition regions in Australia. And we presented some of the theory and thinking that was foundational in us going on to write the report that we've just released. So they are aware of it, and I'd probably like to hand over to Kate to maybe comment from a CWO res perspective, Energy Co's thinking around coordination of benefit sharing.
Yes, thank you, Kim. We have had quite a few sessions, and I'm just thinking of one in particular. We had in Dubbo, which was community, really engaged members of the community from across the res came together. Energy Co was at that meeting. It was, I think, maybe a 4-hour long workshop, and we really talked about, how community benefits can be done better, and also the need for coordination. Because the experience we had been hearing from people in the community was that it does feel a bit out of control, and they're sort of like, who is the overall person body coordinating both the benefits and the management of impacts? And so Energy Co has been, doing ongoing consultation with the community and ongoing work with it. But yeah, certainly we as an organisation keep feeding back into Energy Co that we're hearing that not everyone in the community is feeling that there's that big level of coordination. And so I'm really interested personally to see how the steering committee goes. We're actually conducting an industry roundtable next week, and Energy Co will be there to explain a bit more about that steering committee and how it works. And as I said earlier, my question remains, what's the avenue for community into that? Does that answer?
Yeah, I think as a developer, like, very happy to get on board with all of this as long as it's fair and reasonable and I can see benefits for us as a project, company, commercially, and the community. But I'm not going to take the lead on it in a res area. I will jump on the back and I will facilitate and I'll push and I'll help. But I don't think it's for the individual developers necessarily. Like, there's then like that competition thing starts to play, and then who can do it better, and that's not a good way to go down. So somebody else needs to take the lead, and in my mind, in the reses, that should be Energy Co. It looks like it's Hay Council down in Southwest Res, which is welcome, but they're not the only council on that res. The other council's getting left behind. There's a whole kind of question around that, and there's a gap to be filled, and coordination and leadership and setting the governance of it straight. And I don't know who's filling that gap at the moment.
Just quickly in Southwest, to clarify that
we're going to go on to the next but very related question, which is from Jessica and Delita, which is kind of around who is best placed to be that regional entity. Did you want to add a bit more context on that, Jessica?
Yeah, thanks. I guess I was just wondering if the panel thought there was an existing entity, noting obviously state differences across Australia, but if there was an existing entity that would be best placed to do this. One that came to mind for me in New South Wales was the Regional Organisation of Councils. May not always align with the res boundaries, or if there needs to be a new entity that would do this.
Can I give you my 5 cents worth, Jessica?
Okay.
I've found, and I'd say this with the greatest respect for councils, because they do a very important and very hard and very thankless task, that people on the ground don't genuinely come with a huge amount of trust for council, and so you are pushing uphill when you start to work with council. Having said that, they're the experts at local consultation. Obviously, they're representative of their local community, at least the councillors are. So, they're an obvious party to play a big role, but it hasn't been my experience that anyone in the community, usually the second thing they raise when you start consulting is I don't trust the council. The first thing they raise is, why haven't you consulted with me yet? Which I always find slightly ironic. So they're a difficult party. Energy Co, I'm a big supporter of. However, the state government there's been an erosion of trust there, and the state government's really grappling with whether or not they want to continue sort of putting all their eggs in the Energy Co basket. So that little wobble there is not good. I use the analogy of the trust leaking away. That's caused a gap in leadership, and I would like to see Energy Co sort of learn from its mistakes, but keep going. Personally, that's my view. They're the right party.
Mm-hmm. I think ultimately that there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all answer for this myself. I think it's going to be different in different regions. I think the geographic boundary of what makes sense for regional benefit sharing is going to be different in different places. It may align with res boundary, or it may need to be even like several within a res. For New England, for example, it needs to relate to how communities themselves view their region and identify with their region. So the New England res might end up with multiple regional benefit sharing programs, just because of the nature and scale of that res. And I think within that, there may be an existing organization that does really great on the ground community development work. They've done a lot of relationship building, networking, planning, thinking about what is the future of this region, and it would make sense for them to maybe administer and do the governance for a regional benefit fund. But in other areas, maybe maybe organizations like Regional Development Australia, or maybe it does need to be a new and bespoke function. But I think that we can only know what that looks like in conversation with local people. But I think you're right, Claire. Absolutely, we need leadership in figuring out what it looks like coming from state government, and resources to figure out what it looks like coming from state government.
Yeah, Kate, did you have any thoughts to add about the Southwest RES experience so far?
The only thing I was just going to add about it is that whatever the solution is as to who is going to do that function, there is a recognised need for resourcing, like further resourcing compared to what there is. So obviously we have, thankfully, a hugely motivated council team in Hay, but they're the first to say we want outside expertise. We want and Claire, to your point, they do want to bring other councils along down there, because similar to Central West, there's 3 main councils down there and then others just dipping in. So they kind of want to get their own house in order and then really bring others on board so that everyone in the region benefits.
Excellent, thanks. Hopefully that answered your questions later around the administrations of funds. We'll kind of go through that entity. We've got a question here from Julie McKay, who I think may have left, but it's worthwhile answering this question, which is on calculating the profit margin will rely on factors that are commercial in confidence and private to the developer. So therefore the dollar value per megawatt or per megawatt hour is dependent on the developer opening the book. So how do you get around this? I wonder, Luke, if you can add your perspective on this.
Yeah, we shouldn't be doing that. It should be more or less a standard is evolving for how much a wind farm, how much a solar farm, and how much a battery should be contributing back. And then on top of that, the rates, as I'm calling them, are also being levied on top of that. And then there's access fees for those residents that involve a power line that's mediated by the government. So there's lots of different sort of chunks of money, but they all need to be fairly certain, I think, for the project's economics. I think that's the point, is we can't keep having this ever-growing, uncoordinated list of things to pay for. That bucket of money that needs to be distributed for each project needs to be relatively well known. Projects obviously need to be competitive with each other and, again, internationally competitive. So just getting it clear, getting our language and definition and amounts clear really matters.
I think,
thank you.
Sorry, I think the only thing I would also add to Julia's question is that projects very frequently publish the megawatt capacity, like of a wind farm, a 500 megawatt capacity wind farm or a so many megawatt hour capacity battery program. So that's not like a confidential metric that's sort of like behind closed doors. They wouldn't need to open their books to sort of declare how big a project is. And so using a metric like dollars per megawatt capacity, is a very, very transparent way to negotiate. And as Luke said, I really advocate for us coming up with some very timely, very reasonable type thresholds and standards across the various industry technologies, so that that communities aren't left, being sold a Corolla dressed up as a Rolls Royce or something like that, so that we're getting good outcomes for communities.
I think just to summarize there, I think ultimately the dollar value per megawatt is a commercial decision that is made by the company, influenced by industry standards that are being more and more strongly articulated through industry bodies like Clean Energy Council, but also through things like merit criteria for the various RES processes. But the really important bit, I think, that happens next is once that dollar per megawatt figure is set, that the community is involved in figuring out where does that go, who makes decisions about it, what impact do we create with that dollar figure.
Excellent. Thanks, Jarra. I guess sort of related onto this is a question from Neil around whether the benefits pie is big enough to share across the multiple levels, or whether it dilutes and makes things less impactful. So you've spoken about the need to also do project level benefit sharing as well as regional, and I wonder if you can elaborate on that a little bit more. Kim, perhaps you.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking I'll give Jarra some space on that one. Yeah, look, I think Victoria is a really wonderful example of this, because they have had the payment in lieu of rates mechanism in place for a period of time. So that really slices out the piece that Luke is, really advocating for, like let's call it what it is. It's rates, it's tax, it's not community benefit sharing. So we put that to the side, cost of doing business. We haven't seen any less lucrative benefit sharing programs in Victoria, nor have we seen any less renewable energy projects in Victoria, because they have clearly articulated this cost of doing business for local government. So we slice that out and go, okay, well, we have precedent for that portion of the bucket of funds. Around regional benefit sharing and the project level benefit sharing, what we're actually asking is not for any extra dollars in that quantum from any given project, but some thoughtful consideration to how to coordinate a slice of that to get bigger, more impactful, longer lasting regional type initiatives. And how does that slice interact with multiple projects? It's something that's becoming possible because we're putting 4, 5, 6 projects within a 300k radius. So we aren't actually advocating to the industry for any extra funds in purporting to have a coordinated regional benefit sharing approach. Jarra, any other things to add?
No, that's great. I just wondered if Luke might want to add anything around. I love your story from Canoa Bridge and the research you did around the value for the company in doing good engagement and good benefit sharing.
Yeah, yes, so I think Jarra's saying that we found that it was far cheaper in the end to work with the community than work against it. And that's true because everything you do in a planning process, if it's contested, gets more and more expensive. You keep getting rework, and you have to pay much more attention to a lot of detail. And anyway, it becomes a lot more expensive. And we found it's probably only about 20% of the time, 20% of the cost to do it. Go through the planning process if you did it in an uncontested way versus a highly contested way. So it's actually beneficial to the projects if this actually helps you get through in a timely way, and that's the point. It can be win-win here. I think that's what Jarra's talking about. The other thing to note is the renewables industry alone is not going to hold up the economy of regional Australia. Nowhere close to it. It's not going to happen. But you can still do great things if you pull your money. And I think that's what Kim's saying. And we shouldn't kid people that this is a never-ending gravy train, because at the end of the day, consumers pay for it. That all gets channeled back through consumer bills, really. So it's just a money go round if we hit ourselves here.
Yes, that's probably a great place to end our Q&A section, I suppose. There's been lots of additional questions that we unfortunately haven't had time for, but really great to see that people are thinking deeply around who are ministers, how the governance would go, questions on traditional owners and all the other ones that have come through. Thanks so much for contributing, everyone, and to our panelists, Luke, Lisa and Kate. Thanks for contributing your experience and time today. It's really valuable to have these discussions with our colleagues in the sector. So we'll wrap up in a moment, but I just wanted to particularly shout out to Kim and Jarra for spending a lot of time this year pulling this work together and finessing it into a report to share with the sector. It's always really good to progress the sector's thinking in tangible ways with things that people can point to and really spelling it out there. So thanks to you both as well. And for everyone that's left on the call, feel free to reach out to us if you have particular questions around what's happening in your zone or your area or council area around renewables development and benefit sharing. We're very keen to build up more of these kind of case studies happening everywhere. And just to point out that Community Power Agency is also a not-for-profit, and if you'd love to see more of this kind of work happening, you can donate to us via our website, which go to the website cpagency.org.au, and there's a donate button at the top. We have tax deductibility if that's important to you, but otherwise, thank you all for joining us today, and we'll end the recording there.